She caught her fiancé kissing her sister at the most important night of her life. Not a stranger, her sister. Celeste didn't even flinch when Evelyn found them. She just smiled, slow, deliberate, and said, "You always take things too seriously, Evie." Adrian straightened his jacket like he'd been caught doing nothing worse than stealing a cocktail shrimp. 200 guests stood 20 feet away, laughing, drinking, celebrating a future that no longer existed. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up the nearest glass of champagne, finished it in one swallow, and walked straight into the crowd, until she collided with a man no one in that room dared look at directly. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was. She only knew she needed one thing from him. So, if this story already has your heart pounding, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The Metropolitan Gala was not the kind of event where people showed up to have a good time. They showed up to be seen having a good time. There was a difference, and Evelyn Vale understood it better than most. She had spent 11 years in the wine industry learning to read rooms, learning which smiles were real, which handshakes meant something, which investors were genuinely interested and which ones were simply killing time between dinner courses while their assistants handled the actual decisions. She knew this world. She had survived it. And tonight was supposed to be the night it finally rewarded her for that survival. The Whitmore collection was on display in the east wing of the Hargrove Hotel. 43 bottles arranged across 3 glass tables, each one representing a different decade of her work as a curator and consultant. The collection had taken her 2 years to assemble. She had traveled to 7 countries, sat across tables from elderly vintners who didn't trust women in cellars, negotiated in broken French with a retired diplomat who'd had 3 strokes and still drove a harder bargain than most people half his age. She had done all of it for this room, for this night, for the proposal that Adrian had promised was coming. Not a marriage proposal. They had been engaged for 14 months. She meant the business proposal. The one where Adrian's family formally acknowledged that she was not just his fiancée, but an equal partner in the vineyard acquisition they had been negotiating for the past year. A vineyard that her expertise had identified, her contacts had unlocked, and her reputation had made attractive to the investors sitting across the room right now, sipping wine that she had personally selected. It was supposed to be her night. She stood at the edge of the main hall in a deep burgundy dress, not because it was fashionable, but because it was practical, and she had learned a long time ago that practical things lasted longer than fashionable ones. And she watched the clock on the far wall tick past 9 o'clock. Adrian had texted her at 8:43. "Need 5 minutes. Stay near the Renaud bottles." She had waited near the Renaud bottles. 10 minutes passed, then 15. She didn't panic. She told herself that Adrian was probably caught in conversation with one of the investors. He was good at conversations, better than she was, smoother, easier in social situations in a way that Evelyn had always privately envied, even when it occasionally irritated her. He knew how to laugh at the right moment, how to lean in just slightly when someone made a point, how to make people feel intelligent without making himself seem like he was working at it. She had loved that about him once. She wasn't sure when once had quietly replaced still. At 9:17, she went looking for him. The east wing of the Hargrove Hotel was a series of interconnected rooms, each one more elaborately decorated than the last, and the wine collection occupied the largest of them. Behind it, through a set of doors most guests hadn't noticed, because a floral arrangement roughly the size of a small automobile had been positioned in front of them, was a narrow corridor that led to the service area and a secondary storage room where extra bottles were kept under temperature control. Evelyn knew about the corridor because she had personally walked every inch of the venue 3 days earlier. She pushed through the floral arrangement, ducked past a passing server carrying an empty tray, and pushed open the door to the secondary room. The light inside was low, soft, the kind of lighting that felt accidental in a storage room but would have seemed deliberately romantic anywhere else. Adrian had his hands on someone's face. His eyes were closed. The woman's dress was silver. Her hair was dark. Her perfume, Evelyn recognized it because she had bought the bottle herself, a gift from a trip to Paris 2 Christmases ago, drifted across the room like an accusation. Celeste. Her sister. Evelyn's brain did something strange in that moment. It didn't shut down. It didn't flood with emotion. Instead, it did the thing it always did when confronted with information it wasn't prepared for. It started cataloging details with almost clinical detachment. The way Celeste's hand was pressed flat against Adrian's chest, not pulling him closer, not pushing him away, just resting there like she belonged. The way Adrian's shoulders had relaxed in a way Evelyn had not seen them relax in months. The way neither of them had heard the door. She stood there for what felt like a very long time, but was probably no more than 4 seconds. Then Celeste opened her eyes. She did not jump back. She did not gasp. She looked at Evelyn the way someone looks at a painting they've seen so many times they've stopped actually seeing it, a brief, almost bored recognition. And then she said the words that would replay in Evelyn's head for weeks afterward. "You always take things too seriously, Evie." Adrian pulled back. He had the decency to look alarmed, which Evelyn later decided was worse than if he hadn't. Alarm meant he understood what he had done. It meant this was not a misunderstanding that could be untangled with an explanation. It meant he had known, the entire time he was walking toward this room, exactly what he was walking toward. Evelyn. He said her name like it was the beginning of a sentence, but no sentence followed. "How long?" she said. Not a question. Not really. She already understood from Celeste's complete absence of guilt that the answer was long enough. "Evelyn, please." "How long, Adrian?" Celeste smoothed the front of her dress. 8 months, she said, her voice carrying the same casual tone someone might use to announce they'd been taking a pottery class. "Give or take." 8 months. The vineyard negotiations had started 9 months ago. Evelyn did the math without meaning to. The trips Adrian had taken to meet investors. The evenings Celeste had been mysteriously unavailable for the dinners Evelyn had invited her to. The way her sister had asked questions about Adrian at Christmas, specific, careful questions that Evelyn had interpreted as sisterly interest. She took a breath. "Okay," she said. That was all. Okay. Not because she was fine, not because the word carried any meaning at all, but because her throat had closed around everything else, and okay was the only syllable small enough to fit through the gap. She turned and walked back through the door, the corridor, the floral arrangement, the main hall. The guests were clustered around the wine tables, admiring bottles she had spent 2 years collecting, and for a moment the sight of them, all those expensive suits, all those careful smiles, all that deliberate performed normalcy, made something crack open inside her chest. She reached for the nearest glass of champagne and drank it in one swallow. A server materialized with a replacement. She took that one too. Someone across the room laughed, a sharp, social laugh, the kind that had nothing to do with anything genuinely funny. And the sound hit her like a physical thing. She needed air. She needed to be somewhere that wasn't here. Wasn't this room full of people who were about to watch her life collapse in slow motion? Wasn't... She turned too quickly. The champagne hit her center of gravity at the exact wrong moment. She walked straight into a wall. Except walls don't catch you. This one did. His hand caught her elbow before she could stumble fully. One hand. That was all. No dramatic grab, no sweeping catch, just a firm, unhurried grip on her arm that stopped her momentum with a quiet efficiency that somehow made the whole thing more unsettling than if he'd made a production of it. Evelyn looked up. He was tall, not in the exaggerated way that people sometimes describe tall men, not basketball tall, not movie tall, but the kind of tall that meant she had to actually tilt her head to meet his eyes. Dark eyes. The kind of dark that didn't reflect the room's light so much as absorb it. There was a scar above his right eyebrow, old, thin, the kind that had been there long enough to stop being remarkable to the person who wore it. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not concern, not curiosity. Something more neutral than either of those. The expression of a man who had seen a great many things and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. He was also, she noticed, the only person in the immediate vicinity who was standing alone. Not alone in the way of someone who had lost their conversation partner momentarily, alone in the way of someone who had arranged to be alone, who occupied their solitude with the same deliberate control they brought to everything else. The guests nearest to him had arranged themselves at a slight but unmistakable distance. Not rudely, not obviously, just away. "You're bleeding," he said. She looked down. The champagne glass. She had been gripping it hard enough that the stem had snapped, and a thin line of red was working its way across her palm. She hadn't felt it. "I'm fine," she said. He released her elbow, reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded handkerchief. White, actual linen, not a piece of tissue, a handkerchief, and held it out. She took it, pressed it against her palm. Felt ridiculous. Across the room, she could hear voices changing in register. The particular shift in a crowd's frequency that meant something had happened, that information was moving from person to person in the way information always moved at events like this. She didn't need to look to know what the information was. Adrian had come back into the room. She could feel it. She could feel Celeste, too, somewhere behind her, that specific awareness of a presence you'd spent 31 years learning to recognize. And the awareness now felt like learning a language only to discover every word you'd memorized had a different meaning. Adrian said her name across the room, not loud, but in the particular quiet of a crowd that had sensed a scene approaching and had helpfully fallen half silent. His voice carried perfectly. Evelyn didn't turn around. She looked at the man in front of her instead, at the scar above his eye and the dark gaze that was watching her without judgment or pity, just the simple, patient recognition that something was happening here, and he was going to wait until it resolved itself one way or the other. She didn't know why she did it. Later, she would tell herself it was the champagne. Later, she would tell herself it was the crack in her chest, the 8 months, the 2 years of work she'd built into a night that was collapsing. Later, she would have 100 explanations. In that moment, there was only the understanding that Adrian was walking toward her across a room full of witnesses, that Celeste was somewhere behind her wearing Evelyn's perfume, and that the man standing in front of her was the only fixed point in a room that had started to tilt. She leaned in, just slightly, close enough that she had to lower her voice. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "And I know this is insane, I know that, but I need you to just, for about 30 seconds, pretend you're very glad to see me." He didn't move. "The man calling my name right now is my fiancé," she said. "He spent the last 8 months sleeping with my sister, and he is about to walk over here and try to explain it to me in front of 200 people, and I cannot—" Her voice snagged on the word. She forced it loose. "I cannot be the woman everyone watches fall apart tonight. I can't." Still nothing. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this is—" "What's your name?" he said. She blinked. "Evelyn?" "Evelyn." He said her name like he was registering it somewhere, not warmly, just completely, like it was information he intended to keep. Adrian's footsteps were close now. She could hear the particular rhythm of his walk. She had shared a home with this man for 3 years. She knew his walk the way she knew the sound of the building's elevator, and the footsteps were slowing as he approached. She made a decision. "Can you kiss me?" she said. "Please, just— I need him to see. I need him to understand that I am not going to stand here and be—" "You want to make him jealous," the man said. "Yes. You're asking a stranger. I'm aware." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The thought of a smile, maybe, passing beneath the surface like something moving under ice. "You're very calm for someone who just found out about 8 months, he said. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm furious. There's a difference." Adrian said her name again, 6 feet away. The man in front of her made a decision. He did not lean down to her. He did not make it tentative or apologetic. He lifted one hand, placed it against the side of her face with a steadiness that startled her, and kissed her. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. It felt like a completely different kind of time. When he pulled back, his hand was still against her cheek, and he was looking at her with the same composed expression he'd had since the beginning, except something in his eyes had shifted by a degree she couldn't quite name. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Adrian, who had stopped 6 feet away with an expression on his face that Evelyn had genuinely never seen him wear before. Raw, uncertain, the look of a man confronting a reality he hadn't prepared for. "I think," the man beside her said, in a voice pitched perfectly to Carrie, that she's finished with the conversation. Adrian's jaw worked. Celeste appeared at his shoulder, and whatever she had planned to say dissolved when her eyes landed on the man standing next to Evelyn. Something happened to her face, a specific involuntary subtraction of confidence that Evelyn noted with more satisfaction than she had expected to feel about anything tonight. The crowd breathed. Nobody moved for a moment that stretched like taffy. Then Adrian turned around and walked away, and Celeste followed, and the room rearranged itself with the practiced ease of people who had witnessed a scene and were collectively deciding to pretend they hadn't. Evelyn exhaled for the first time in what felt like several minutes. She was still holding his handkerchief against her palm. The cut was minor. It had mostly stopped bleeding. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "I should probably give this back." She held out the handkerchief. "Keep it," he said. She looked at him then. Really looked, the way she looked at a bottle when she was trying to determine whether its reputation was earned or simply well marketed. And she said, "I don't even know your name." He looked at her for a moment. "Dante Moretti," he said. It meant nothing to her. Not yet. "Evelyn Vale," she said. He accepted this with the same composure he had accepted everything else. And then he did something that surprised her. He looked at the wine table nearest to them, at the bottles she had spent 2 years collecting, and he said, "The 1987 Barolo, the one on the far left. That's a Giacomo Conterno." She stared. "You know Conterno?" "I know what's worth keeping," he said. And for the first time since she had walked through that door and seen her sister's hand press flat against Adrian's chest, Evelyn Vale felt something shift inside her that was not grief and was not anger. She didn't have a name for it yet. She would. The handkerchief was still in her hand when she left the gala. She didn't remember walking out. She remembered the wine table and Dante Moretti saying, "I know what's worth keeping," and then she remembered the cold air of the street outside hitting her face like a correction. Somewhere in between those two moments, she had retrieved her coat from the check, declined 3 separate offers of assistance from event staff who had clearly witnessed enough of the evening to be concerned, and navigated the front steps of the Hargrove Hotel without turning her ankle, which she later considered a minor personal triumph, given the shoes and the champagne and the structural damage to her evening. The city was loud in the way cities are loud at 10 o'clock on a Friday. Not the frantic noise of rush hour, but the settled, deliberate noise of people who had decided the night was going to be something and were committed to that decision regardless of what it cost them. Taxis. Music from a bar half a block down. A couple arguing on the corner with the exhausted fluency of people who had been having the same argument for years. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Her hand had stopped bleeding. The cut was shallow. She'd had worse from broken bottle glass in her years of cellar work, but the handkerchief was stained at one corner, a dark, rust-colored bloom against the white linen. She folded it carefully, the way you fold something you're not sure what to do with, and put it in her coat pocket. Her phone had 14 notifications. She turned it face down in her other hand without looking at them. A town car idled at the curb in front of her. She hadn't called one. She was about to step around it when the rear window slid down, and the voice that came from inside was unhurried and entirely without surprise, as if finding her on this particular sidewalk had been the expected conclusion to an equation he'd already solved. "You're going to stand there until you figure out where you're going," Dante Moretti said. "That could take a while." She looked at the car. She looked at the window. She said, "Are you following me? You walked past my car. Your car was parked in front of the hotel. I was leaving. So was I." "Yes," he said. "And now we're both standing in the cold having this conversation instead of leaving. Get in. I'll take you wherever you're going." "I don't know where I'm going." "Then it won't take long to get there." She stood on the sidewalk for another 3 seconds, which was long enough to establish that she was making a choice rather than a reflex. And then she got in the car. The interior was quiet in the specific way that expensive things are quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the management of it. The sense that the outside world had been politely asked to wait. The driver didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her, just pulled smoothly into traffic as if her presence had been expected all along, which somehow made everything worse and more interesting at the same time. Dante was looking out the opposite window. He'd removed his jacket and folded it across his knee, and without it he looked less formal and somehow more dangerous, which was not a combination Evelyn had previously considered possible. "How's your hand?" he said. "Fine." "You were gripping the glass hard enough to break it." "I noticed." "Before or after?" She looked at him. "After." He nodded like this was a reasonable answer, which it was, and the silence between them settled into something she couldn't immediately classify. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable, just present. The way silence feels when the other person in it is actually thinking rather than waiting for their turn to speak. "The man who is calling your name," he said. "He's been with your sister for 8 months. That's what she said. And you believe her." "Celeste doesn't lie about things she's proud of," Evelyn said. She was proud of it. He turned from the window then and looked at her directly, and she had the disconcerting experience of being seen, not observed, not evaluated, but seen, by someone who appeared to have no agenda attached to the act. He wasn't looking at her the way Adrian had looked at her, like she was a component in something larger he was assembling. He wasn't looking at her the way people at the gala looked at her, like she was a story that had just become more interesting. He was just looking. "What happens to the vineyard?" he said. She hadn't expected that question. Not because it wasn't the right question, it was exactly the right question, the one underneath all the others, but because no one had asked it. Not in those terms. Not in the cold, accurate terms of what this night actually meant for the 2 years of work that preceded it. "I don't know yet," she said. "It was your work that made it attractive." "Yes." "And the acquisition is in Whitmore's name." She looked at him. "How do you know the vineyard is in Adrian's name?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at his folded jacket on his knee, then back at her, and said, "I know most of the significant wine acquisitions in this region. It's a small world." It was a true statement that somehow didn't answer the question. She filed that away. "The acquisition isn't finalized," she said. "There are still 3 signatures missing and a financing agreement that's contingent on investor confidence, which, after tonight..." She stopped. Let the implication finish itself. "After tonight, the investors saw you standing with me," he said. "I don't know what that means yet." "It means something," he said, "whether you want it to or not." The car moved through the city. She watched the streets change outside the window. The hotel district giving way to the older neighborhoods, the architecture shifting from glass and intention to brick and history. And she thought about the 1987 Barolo on the table she'd left behind, and the 2 years she'd spent building a collection that was now evidence in someone else's story. "Where are we going?" she said. "You said you didn't know." "I'm asking where you're taking me." "Nowhere yet," he said. "I'm giving you time to think." "In your car. It's warmer than the sidewalk." She almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come to it all night, and she resented it slightly, the way you resent a small kindness when you're trying to maintain a productive level of rage. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I'm aware." "I mean the whole thing. You've already done more than..." "You asked me for 30 seconds, he said. "You didn't ask for a car or a conversation. I know that." He looked at her. "You can get out anywhere you'd like. Marcus will pull over." The driver's name was Marcus, apparently. "I'm not asking to get out," she said. "I know that too." She turned back to the window. "You make a habit of this? Rescuing strangers at parties?" "No." "Then why bit?" "Because you were the only honest person in that room," he said. "Everyone else in there was performing. You were just..." He paused. Not searching for the word exactly, more like deciding whether to use the one he already had. "Real," he said. The word landed differently than she expected. She didn't answer it, not because she didn't have one, but because the situation was strange enough already, and she was 31 years old and her fiancé had spent 8 months with her sister, and she was sitting in a stranger's car at 10:30 at night with a blood-stained handkerchief in her pocket. And some part of her felt that adding real to the equation without thinking about it first would be a mistake. "Take me to my apartment," she said. He looked at her. "Please," she said. She gave Marcus the address. The ride took 12 minutes. He didn't try to fill them. She didn't either. It was the kind of silence that she suspected he was used to and she was not, and she spent the 12 minutes being aware of that difference with a specificity that surprised her. When the car stopped in front of her building, she reached for the door and then stopped. "The Conterno," she said. "The 1987. How did you know it was worth noticing?" "The label was slightly off-center," he said. "Original bottling, not a reproduction, and the cork seal was intact in a way that's very hard to fake after 40 years. She looked at him. "You've held one before," she said. "I've held several." "Where?" Something moved in his expression. The same undersurface thing she'd noticed at the gala. The thought of something running beneath the composed exterior like a current beneath ice. "My father's cellar," he said, "a long time ago." She got out of the car. She was halfway to her building door when she turned back. He was still watching from the window, not leaning out, not making it obvious, just watching, the way a person watches something they have not yet decided what to do about. "Thank you," she said, "for the 30 seconds. And the car." "And the car." The window slid up. The town car pulled away. Evelyn stood in front of her building in a burgundy dress with a broken champagne glass cut on her hand, and she watched the car's taillights until they turned a corner and disappeared. And then she went inside. She did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone face up this time and read through the 14 notifications she had ignored, which had become 27 notifications by now, because the night had not stopped moving simply because she'd left it. 3 from Adrian. She opened the first one. "Can we talk?" Second one. "Please, Evelyn." Third one. "I know you're angry. I understand, but we need to discuss the vineyard situation before you make any decisions." The vineyard situation. She set the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. The vineyard situation, not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I don't know what I was thinking." Not even a gesture toward the 14 months of engagement or the 3 years of shared living or the fact that her sister, had been in his hands in a room 20 feet from 200 people who knew both their names. The vineyard situation. She opened her laptop. She didn't look up Dante Moretti immediately. She spent 40 minutes doing what she always did when she needed to think clearly. She worked. She pulled up her acquisition files, the investor correspondence, the financing documents, the 3 outstanding signatures. She read through everything with the same methodical attention she brought to evaluating a new wine. Not looking for what she wanted to find, just looking. What she found was this. Adrian's family had contributed the property connection and the family name. Evelyn had contributed everything else, every contact, every evaluation, every negotiation strategy, every reason the investors had said yes. Her name appeared in the documents as consultant and curatorial director. Not partner, not co-owner, consultant. She sat with that for a while. Then she searched Dante Moretti. The results loaded slowly, which seemed appropriate for information that was going to take time to process. She read the first 3 articles, then the next 4, then a longer piece in a financial publication from 3 years ago that someone had clearly worked very hard to be vague within the bounds of what was legally defensible. Connected to private acquisitions networks operating outside standard regulatory oversight. Sources within federal law enforcement describe Moretti as a person of significant interest. Business empire spans multiple sectors, including import, private security, and rare collectibles. She closed the laptop, sat in her kitchen at 2 in the morning, thought about dark eyes absorbing light instead of reflecting it, thought about a handkerchief that nobody carried anymore, thought about a man who could identify a 1987 Giacomo Conterno by the angle of the label and knew it because his father had kept several in a cellar a long time ago. She did not call him. She didn't have his number. She noted the absence with something she declined to examine too closely, and then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling until her alarm went off at 6. She was back at her desk by 7. Adrian called at 7:15. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 7:40. She picked up. "I don't want to hear an explanation," she said before he could start. "I want to talk about the vineyard." Silence on his end. Then, "Okay. I'm a consultant on the documents." "Evelyn, I'm a consultant, not a partner.
I want to know when that changed from what we discussed. His voice shifted. She'd heard this shift before, the particular modulation Adrian's voice underwent when he was moving from one mode to another, from contrite to strategic, and the speed of that shift told her everything she needed to know about which of those modes was the real one. The legal structure was always going to be, "You told me we were partners," she said, "in October, in November, at Christmas dinner when my parents asked about the vineyard and you said we've been working on this together. Are those conversations I'm misremembering?" The legal structure. Stop saying legal structure. Her voice was level. She was proud of how level it was. "You put my name on the documents as a consultant because you needed my expertise and my contacts and my reputation to make the acquisition work, and you planned to cut me out once it was finalized. Yes or no?" Silence. "I'm going to need you to say it or not say it, Adrian. It's not that simple." "It is, actually. That's the thing about yes and no questions. They're simple by design." She paused. "The investors came because of me. The Bertrands came because I spent 4 years building a relationship with their export director. The Nakamura group came because I presented at their symposium in Kyoto 18 months ago. If I call them this morning and tell them I'm withdrawing from the project, what happens to the acquisition?" Another silence. Longer this time. "Don't do this," he said. "I'm not doing anything yet. I'm asking a question." "Evelyn?" His voice had changed again. This was a third mode she recognized less well. Not contrite, not strategic, but something rawer, something that sounded almost like actual feeling. "I know I hurt you with Celeste. I know that. And I know there is nothing I can say right now that, this isn't about Celeste," she said. "Of course this is about the vineyard. Celeste is its own conversation, and I'm not having it yet. Right now I'm asking you whether my name belongs on this project in the capacity that we agreed or whether you were planning to renegotiate that after the signatures." He didn't answer. She had her answer. "Okay," she said. Same word as last night, same hollowness. "I'll be in touch." She hung up. Her coffee had gone cold. She drank it anyway, standing at her kitchen window, watching the city doing what it always did at 7 in the morning, which was move forward with complete indifference to whatever had happened in the hours before. Her phone rang again. Not Adrian this time. Celeste? Evelyn stared at her sister's name on the screen for 3 rings, 4, 5. On the 6th, she picked up. Celeste didn't bother with a greeting. "You embarrassed yourself last night," she said, "and you embarrassed Adrian in front of people who matter." Evelyn sat down, slowly. "Okay. That man, whoever you found to perform that little scene, people are talking about it. Do you understand what that looks like? You're supposed to be a professional. You had investors in that room." "I did," Evelyn said. "Yes. And you chose to create a scene?" "I chose," Evelyn said carefully, "to not stand in the middle of a room and cry in front of 200 people, which is what you were counting on, I think." Celeste's voice sharpened. "Don't be dramatic." 8 months, Celeste. "We were going to tell you." "When?" When the timing was what? When the vineyard was signed? When I'd served my purpose and the documents were done and you and Adrian had figured out the next arrangement? Evelyn heard her own voice doing something unfamiliar, pressing against the composure she'd spent the night building, and she made a deliberate choice to hold it together for exactly as long as this conversation required. "I want to understand something, and I need you to be honest with me for once, which I recognize is a significant request." Silence. "Did you know about the documents?" Evelyn said. "Did you know he'd listed me as a consultant?" A pause that lasted half a second too long. "That's a legal matter," Celeste said. Evelyn closed her eyes. There it was. "That's a legal matter." The exact phrase. Not "of course not." Not "what are you talking about?" Not even the convincing performance of ignorance that Celeste was fully capable of when she needed it. Just the phrase, borrowed directly from Adrian's vocabulary, which meant it had been discussed between them, which meant the conversation had happened, which meant they had sat together, her fiancé and her sister, and talked about what Evelyn's name on a document would and would not mean.
I have to go, Evelyn said. Don't do anything stupid, Celeste said. The man you were with last night, people were talking. Some of what they were saying was not good, Evie. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know who I'm dealing with, Evelyn said. She hung up. She sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She opened her contacts, scrolled to a name she'd only added because an industry contact had pressed a card into her hand at a symposium 2 years ago, and said, "If you ever need a lawyer who understands wine law and isn't afraid of complicated situations, call this person," and she called the number. The lawyer's name was Patricia Vane. She picked up on the second ring, which suggested either an early schedule or the specific alertness of someone whose clients tended to call with urgency. "This is Vane." "My name is Evelyn Vale," Evelyn said. "I'm a wine curator and consultant. I've been working on a vineyard acquisition for the past year. My name is on the documents as a consultant, but the verbal agreement was for partnership. The acquisition isn't finalized. I need to know what my options are." A pause. "When did you discover the discrepancy?" "Last night." "Has anything been signed?" "Not yet. 3 signatures pending." "Then you're not out of options," Patricia Vane said. "Come in this morning." Evelyn wrote down the address. She was already reaching for her coat. She was halfway out the door when her phone buzzed one more time. Not a call. A message from a number she didn't have saved. "The 1987 Barolo is worth more than anything else in that collection. So is your expertise. Don't let either of them get buried in someone else's transaction. DM." She stood in her doorway and read the message twice. He had her number. She hadn't given it to him. She didn't know how to feel about that yet, and she didn't have time to figure it out, so she put the phone in her pocket and went to meet the lawyer. And the morning outside was gray and cold and completely indifferent to the fact that something in her life had just passed, a point where going back was no longer a direction that existed. Patricia Vane's office was on the 14th floor of a building that had no signage on the outside, which Evelyn later decided was either a very confident statement or a very practical one, depending on what kind of clients you were trying to attract. The waiting room had 2 chairs, no magazines, and a window that looked directly at the side wall of the building next door. The assistant who buzzed her in didn't offer coffee or small talk. She just said, "Ms. Vane will be with you in 4 minutes," and was accurate to within 30 seconds. Patricia Vane was somewhere between 50 and 60. With gray hair, she wore short and deliberate, the kind of cut that said she had made a decision about it once and had not reconsidered. She shook Evelyn's hand with the grip of someone who had long since stopped worrying about whether her handshake was appropriate for her gender, and she gestured to the chair across from her desk without preamble. "Walk me through the timeline," she said. Evelyn walked her through it. She was good at timelines. Wine taught you that. The way years mattered, the way sequence was everything, the way a bottle from the wrong decade was not the same bottle regardless of what the label claimed. She went through it without editorializing, which took effort, because the anger was still there under everything, steady and hot, like a pilot light she'd stopped noticing, but that was clearly still burning. Patricia listened without interrupting. She took notes with an actual pen on actual paper, which Evelyn found oddly reassuring. When Evelyn finished, the lawyer set down her pen and looked at her across the desk with the expression of someone who was organizing information rather than reacting to it. "The verbal agreement for partnership," she said. "Do you have documentation? Emails, texts, anything in writing where Whitmore acknowledges your role as partner rather than consultant?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "Several." "How explicit?" "One email where he uses the word co-owner in reference to the acquisition structure. One text thread where we discuss the investor split in terms that only make sense if I'm a partner. And a voice message, I saved it, from November where he explicitly says, 'Our vineyard.'" Patricia wrote something down. "Okay, that's workable." She paused. "I need to ask you something that may feel unrelated but isn't. The man you were photographed with at the gala last night." Evelyn went very still. "Photographed," she said. Patricia turned her monitor to face Evelyn. The image was from a society column, one of the publications that covered events like the Metropolitan Gala with the specific enthusiasm of a publication that understood its readership, wanted to know who was standing next to whom and why. The photograph was clear and well lit, because the gala had been well lit. and it showed Evelyn in the burgundy dress with Dante Moretti's hand against her face and his mouth on hers. And it was, she had to admit from the outside, as a striking image. Not because it was romantic exactly, because of the particular quality of stillness in both of them. The way neither of them looked uncertain. The caption read, Evelyn Vale, wine curator, with Dante Moretti at the Metropolitan Gala. And below it, in smaller text, Moretti, whose business interests have been the subject of ongoing federal inquiry, was seen in deep conversation with Vale throughout the evening. One photograph, Evelyn said. One photograph that is currently on 3 different society pages and has been picked up by a financial news aggregator because of Moretti's name, Patricia said. She turned the monitor back. I'm not making a moral judgment. I'm making a strategic one. If you intend to pursue a legal claim against the Whitmore acquisition, you need to understand that Adrian Whitmore's legal team will use every available tool to undermine your credibility. This photograph is a tool. Evelyn breathed through her nose. He helped me. In a difficult moment, that's all. I understand, and in a courtroom or a deposition, that explanation may be perfectly adequate. Patricia picked up her pen again. But I need to know whether there's anything further I should know about your relationship with Moretti before this becomes adversarial. There's no relationship, Evelyn said. We spoke for approximately 30 minutes. He gave me a ride home. And the text message you received this morning? Evelyn looked at her. How do you know about that? Patricia met her eyes steadily. I don't. I'm guessing from your expression that there was one. She set down the pen. Ms. Vale, I've been doing this for 22 years. Dante Moretti is not someone who appears in a situation without a reason. I'm not saying his intentions toward you are negative. I'm saying that men like Moretti don't make random gestures, and if you're about to go to war with one of this city's better-connected families over a wine acquisition, you need to be clear about who is standing in your corner and why. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, the side wall of the adjacent building said nothing helpful. File the injunction, Evelyn said. Block the signatures until my claim to partnership is reviewed. That will escalate things quickly. I know. The Whitmore family has retained legal representation that I'm familiar with. They will fight this. I know that too. Patricia Vane looked at her for a moment, the same unhurried, organizing look she'd been applying since Evelyn walked in, and then she nodded once and reached for her phone. I'll have the paperwork drafted by this afternoon, she said. Don't speak to Adrian Whitmore again without telling me first. Don't speak to his legal team under any circumstances. And she paused. Be careful with Moretti. Not because I know anything specific, because I've seen enough to know that specific information is rarely the point. Evelyn left the office at 10:45. She stood on the sidewalk outside the unmarked building and read the text message again. The 1987 Barolo is worth more than anything else in that collection. So is your expertise. Don't let either of them get buried in someone else's transaction. She typed, How did you get this number? The response came in under a minute. Your card was on the registration table next to the Renault bottles. You left it there. She had. She left cards everywhere at events like that. Industry habit, the same way some people breathed. She hadn't even thought about it. She typed, Thank you for the message. A pause. Then, Have dinner with me tonight. She stared at the screen. The rational response, the response that Patricia Vane would clearly endorse, the response that anyone looking at the situation from the outside would immediately identify as correct, was no. The situation was already complicated enough. The photograph was already on 3 society pages. She had just instructed a lawyer to file an injunction against a man she'd been engaged to for 14 months, and the only sleep she'd gotten was the 2 hours between 6 and her alarm. And she was still wearing yesterday's mascara because she hadn't looked closely enough at the mirror this morning to care. She typed, Where? He sent an address, a restaurant she knew by name but had never been to, the kind of place that existed in a city's imagination more than its physical geography, that people referenced without being certain it was real. 7 o'clock, he sent. She put her phone in her pocket and hailed a cab. She had 6 things to do before 7 o'clock, and she was going to do all of them. And she was going to do them in the order that made sense, and not in the order her emotions preferred, because that was how she had survived everything so far, and she had no reason to change methods now. She did not think about dinner until 5:45. She was back in her apartment, in different clothes, gray trousers, a cream blouse, something that communicated competence rather than occasion. When her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, she almost didn't pick up. She picked up. "Evelyn Vale?" A man's voice, professional in the specific way of people whose professionalism is institutional rather than learned. "Yes. My name is Agent Cole Hargrove, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division." A pause that had clearly been timed to give that sentence room to land. "I'm calling because you were seen at the Metropolitan Gala last night with Dante Moretti, and we'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." The room did not spin. She was proud of that. She held the phone slightly away from her ear as if that would help, then brought it back. "I spoke with him briefly at a social event," she said. "I don't see why that requires a federal conversation." "We're not suggesting it does, Ms. Vale. We'd simply like to understand the nature of your connection to Mr. Moretti. It's a standard inquiry. We speak with many people in his social orbit." Social orbit. She filed the phrase. "I'll need to consult with my attorney before scheduling anything," she said. "Of course." He gave her a number. "We'd appreciate hearing from you within 48 hours. She hung up and called Patricia Vane. Patricia answered on the first ring, which suggested she had been expecting the call. "The FBI just contacted me," Evelyn said. "How quickly?" Patricia said. 40 minutes after I left your office." A silence. "That's fast," Patricia said. "They're either watching Moretti very closely or they were already interested in the gala guest list." Another silence. "Don't meet with them without me present. I'll reach out to Hargrove this afternoon." "You know him?" "I know of him," Patricia said. "He's been working the Moretti case for 3 years. He's not going to be gentle about this, Evelyn. He's looking for an angle, and you just became one." Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed. "Is there anything you need to tell me," Patricia said, "about what actually happened last night? Because now is the time." "We kissed," Evelyn said. "He gave me a ride home. He sent me one text message this morning." "That's all?" "That's all." Patricia breathed out. "Okay, keep it that way. And if Moretti contacts you again—" "He asked me to dinner tonight," Evelyn said. The silence on the other end was particular. "And you?" "I said yes." "Evelyn, I know." "Do you?" She stood up and moved to the window. The city outside was doing its afternoon thing. Delivery trucks, pedestrians moving in the slightly purposeful way of people who were cold and wanted to be somewhere else. Entirely normal. Entirely indifferent. "Patricia," she said, "I spent 2 years building something. I did it carefully and correctly and with every tool I had, and the person I trusted with it used it to build something for himself and planned to hand me a consultant credit when the papers were signed. I'm not going to sit in my apartment for the rest of the week making cautious decisions. There's a difference between courageous and reckless. I know the difference." "I'm not sure you do right now," Patricia said. Not unkindly, just accurately. "Go to dinner. Be careful what you say. Call me afterward." Evelyn got to the restaurant at 7:02. Dante was already there, but not at the bar, not waiting near the entrance, but already seated at a table in the back that had a clear sight line to both the front door and the kitchen entrance, which she noticed and noted without comment. He stood when she approached, which was a courtesy she hadn't expected and was not sure how to categorize, and he waited until she sat before he sat. And these were small things, but they were not small in the specific way that small things stop being small when you're paying attention. "The FBI called me," she said. He didn't react. "When?" "This afternoon, a few hours after I met with my lawyer." "Hargrove?" "Yes." She looked at him. "You know him?" "He's been interested in my business activities for several years," Dante said. "He's thorough. He's not dishonest, which makes him more dangerous than if he were." He picked up the water glass, drank, set it down. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd consult my attorney, which I did." She paused. "My attorney told me to cancel dinner." And yet, she agreed. He looked at her across the table with that same quality of attention that had unsettled her at the gala. The attention that had no performance in it, that was simply what it was. "Why did you come?" he said. "Because I wanted to ask you something." "Then ask." The text you sent me, she said. Don't let your expertise get buried in someone else's transaction. You'd already looked into the acquisition. His expression didn't change. Before the gala, she said, you knew who I was before I crashed into you. A pause. 1 beat, 2. I knew your name from the curatorial credit on the collection catalog, he said. I'd read it before attending. I know most of the significant wine professionals in this region. And you knew Adrian Whitmore's name. I knew the Whitmore family's financial position. Which is? He looked at her steadily. Not good, he said. The Whitmore estate has been in quiet decline for 4 years. 2 failed investments, a tax dispute that was settled but cost significantly, and a property in the South that's been bleeding maintenance costs since their father died. The vineyard acquisition isn't an expansion for them, Evelyn. It's a lifeline. They needed your expertise to make it viable, and they needed the investors you brought to make it fundable. He paused. Without you, the acquisition collapses. The restaurant noise moved around them. Low music, other conversations, the specific ambient sound of a place expensive enough that no individual element announced itself. You're telling me this because you want something, she said. Yes, he said. She appreciated the honesty so much it almost frightened her. What? I want to buy the vineyard, he said. Not take it, not acquire it through the existing deal. Start a separate transaction. The acquisition hasn't been finalized. Your lawyer filed the injunction this afternoon, which means the Whitmore deal is currently frozen. There's a window where the vineyard's original owners may be open to a different offer. She stared at him. I would fund it, he said. Completely. The acquisition, the operational costs, the infrastructure, in exchange for your expertise as managing director. Full partnership, not the consultant arrangement Whitmore gave you. Your name on the ownership documents with the same legal weight as mine. You've been planning this, she said. I've been considering it since I read your name in the catalog, he said. The gala was coincidence. You were not. That's not reassuring. I know, he said. It's true anyway. She looked at the table, at the bread neither of them had touched, at her own hands, this left one with the small healing cut across the palm where the champagne glass had broken. Why me? She said. You have money. You could hire any curator. I don't want a curator, he said. I want someone who can build something that lasts. There's a difference. Most people in this industry know wine, but very few of them understand what makes a vineyard become something people talk about in 50 years. He paused. You do. She looked up. How do you know that? Because you spent 2 years building a collection for someone who was planning to cut you out, and the collection was still extraordinary, he said. You don't work to impress other people. You work because the work means something to you. That's very rare. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down. Adrian's name. She turned it face down. If I said yes, she said slowly, and I'm not saying yes, I'm saying if, what happens when the federal investigation becomes a problem? It may become a problem, he said. I won't tell you otherwise. That's not an answer. It's the honest version of an answer. He folded his hands on the table, and she noticed again the quality of stillness he carried, the way he inhabited a space without filling it unnecessarily. I have attorneys who are very good at their work. I have resources. What I don't have... He stopped. What? She said. I don't have someone who looks at the things I care about and understands them, he said. Most people who work with me are afraid of me or want something from me. You asked me for a 30-second favor and thanked me for it and got out of my car. That's also very rare. She sat with that. Her phone buzzed again. She kept it face down. I need time, she said. You have until the injunction holds, he said. After that, the window closes. She nodded. The food came. They ate. They talked about wine. Not the business of it, but the thing itself. The way great vintages were made from difficult years. The way some of the best bottles in history came from harvests nobody expected anything from. He talked about a cellar he'd visited in Burgundy where the vintner was 83 years old and still tasted every barrel personally. She talked about a vineyard in the Douro Valley where the workers sang during harvest because the original owner had believed it affected the fermentation, and the current owner kept the tradition because the wine was still extraordinary and nobody wanted to test the theory. It was the most normal 2 hours she'd had in longer than she could clearly identify. She was putting on her coat to leave when her phone rang. Not Adrian, not Celeste. Patricia Vane at 9:45 at night. She picked up. "There's a problem," Patricia said. Evelyn went still. "What kind?" "The injunction," Patricia said. Adrian's attorneys filed a counter motion this afternoon. They're claiming the acquisition documents are legitimate as written and that your participation was always understood to be in a consulting capacity. She paused. "That part I expected. What I didn't expect is the second filing." "What second filing?" "They're claiming," Patricia said, "that you misrepresented your credentials to the investors. Specifically, they've filed a declaration stating that the sommelier certification you hold from the Vanterre Institute was obtained through a process that's currently under investigation by the Institute's accreditation board." The restaurant sounds continued around her. She was aware of Dante a few feet away, coat in hand, watching her face without pretending not to. "That's not true," Evelyn said. "My certification is legitimate." "I know," Patricia said, "but the filing creates a cloud over your professional standing, and if the investors see it before we can refute it—" "Evelyn, the Nakamura Group has a morality clause in their investment agreements. If your credentials are publicly questioned, they'll withdraw," Evelyn said. "Yes. Adrian did this," she said. "His attorneys did it," Patricia said, "which means Adrian authorized it." She stood very still. The coat was half on. She didn't move to finish putting it on. The man across the gala, the man who had told her at Christmas that she was the smartest person he knew, the man who had said "our vineyard" in a voicemail she had saved, that man had told his lawyers to attack her credentials. "How do I fight it?" she said. "We respond with documentation. I've already contacted the Vanterre Institute. They're in a different time zone. I'm waiting to hear back. But Evelyn, the timing is designed to be damaging even if we disprove it. By the time we file the response, the investors may already have seen the allegation." Evelyn turned her back to the restaurant and faced the wall. "Call the Nakamura Group tonight," she said. "Get to them before they see the filing. Tell them we're responding to a malicious counterclaim and the documentation is coming." "It's 9:45. "I know. Call them anyway." She breathed. "What about the Bertrands?" "I'll try." "Patricia." She heard her own voice do something she hadn't given it permission to do, a catch, small and involuntary, that she immediately controlled. "This is 2 years. This is my name." "I know," Patricia said. "I know it is. Let me work. Go home." She hung up. Dante was still there. He had put on his coat and he was waiting, not approaching, just present. The same way he'd been present on the sidewalk the night before, a fixed point while everything else tilted. She turned around. "They attacked my certification," she said. "Adrian's lawyers filed a declaration questioning my professional credentials to destroy my standing with the investors." He looked at her. 2 years, she said. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say it would be okay. He said, "Do you want to go to war?" She looked at him across the quiet restaurant. She thought about the Whitmore family and their 4 years of quiet financial decline that she hadn't known about. She thought about 8 months and a silver dress. "And you always take things too seriously, Evie." She thought about a voice message she'd saved where someone said "our vineyard" with total conviction. She thought about a consultant credit on a document that was supposed to be her future. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. "Then we start tomorrow." She was halfway to the door when she realized that the decision she'd just made in the back of an expensive restaurant, standing in a half-on coat with Patricia Vane's voice still in her ear, was not the same decision she'd walked in to make that evening. She had come to this dinner cautious. She was leaving it committed. And the line between those two things was so narrow and had been crossed so quietly that she almost hadn't noticed it happening, which was, she realized, the most dangerous thing about it. She had stopped being someone things happened to and had become someone who was going to make things happen. And that shift, that specific and irreversible alteration in her own center of gravity, meant that the woman who had stood at that gala gripping a champagne glass until it broke no longer existed in quite the same form. What replaced her would have to be something that could survive what was coming, because what was coming, she understood this now with complete and uncomfortable clarity, was not going to be clean or fair or over quickly, and she was going to need every single thing she had ever learned about patience and precision and knowing the difference between a bottle worth fighting for and one that had already turned. She pushed through the restaurant door and the cold air hit her, and she finished putting on her coat and walked into the night already thinking about tomorrow, already calculating, already the person she was going to have to be, which was no longer the person Adrian Whitmore had planned for, and no longer the person Celeste had dismissed, and no longer the person who waited near the Renault bottles trusting that the future she'd built would hold. It would not hold. She was going to have to build a different one. She didn't sleep again. This was becoming a pattern she didn't have the luxury of addressing. She got home at 10:20, changed out of the cream blouse, made coffee she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and every document she had ever created in connection with the Whitmore Vineyard acquisition, which was, when printed and stacked, approximately 4 inches of paper, representing 2 years and 7 months of her life in physical form. She read through all of it, not looking for comfort, looking for weapons. By 2 in the morning, she had identified 11 instances in the written record where Adrian had explicitly described the acquisition as a joint venture, a shared project, or, most useful, our deal. 2 emails used the phrase our deal. One used, we're building this together. The voicemail she'd saved used our vineyard 3 times in 90 seconds, which she had at the time interpreted as affection and now understood as carelessness. People were careful when they were lying. They got careless when they thought they were safe. Adrian had thought he was safe. He was wrong. She forwarded everything to Patricia Vane at 2:14 in the morning with a subject line that read, documentation, all of it. Call me when you have it. Then she closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a while and thought about the Vanter Institute and the certification she'd earned 11 years ago after a 3-month residency program that had cost her the equivalent of 6 months' salary and had required her to pass a blind tasting evaluation that fewer than 30% of candidates cleared on the first attempt. She had cleared it on the first attempt. The idea that anyone was now publicly questioning that certification, the idea that Adrian's lawyers had sat in a room and decided that the most efficient way to neutralize her was to attack the thing she had worked the hardest for, the credential that had opened every door the wine industry had ever opened for her, produced in her chest a specific kind of cold fury that was nothing like the hot, ragged grief of finding them in that storage room. This was different. This was the feeling of understanding exactly what someone thought of you, of having the calculation they'd made about your value and your vulnerability exposed with total clarity. They thought her credentials were her weakness. They were about to discover they were wrong about that too. Patricia called at 7:05. The Vanter Institute responded, she said. Their accreditation board confirms there is no active investigation into any certification holder or certification process. The declaration Adrian's lawyers filed is based on a complaint that was submitted, reviewed, and dismissed 14 months ago. They dismissed it in 30 days because it had no merit. Evelyn set down her coffee. Who filed the complaint? A pause. The complaint was filed anonymously, Patricia said, but the Institute maintains records of the IP address associated with the submission. My contact there was reluctant to share it, but Patricia. It originated from a device registered to a Celeste Vale. The kitchen was very quiet, 14 months ago, 1 month after the engagement, before the vineyard negotiations had even formally begun. Celeste had filed a false complaint against her professional certification 14 months ago, held it in reserve like a card she'd been waiting to play, and then passed the information to Adrian's lawyers when the acquisition came under threat. This was not impulsive. This was not the angry reaction of a woman who'd been caught. This was planned, patient, the kind of thing you did when you were thinking multiple moves ahead. She filed it when Adrian and I got engaged, Evelyn said. That's the timeline, yes. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. The city was already moving at full speed outside, indifferent as always, doing its morning thing with complete commitment. Can we prove the complaint was malicious, she said. We can prove it was false, and that it was filed anonymously from a device registered to your sister. Whether a judge considers that sufficient to establish malicious intent depends on the judge. Patricia paused. But here's what matters right now. I've already contacted the Nakamura Group, Their legal team reviewed our response documentation this morning and confirmed they will not be withdrawing based on the counterclaim. The morality clause requires an actual finding of misconduct, not an allegation. Evelyn exhaled. And the Bertrands? Still waiting. I expect to hear by noon. Okay. She pressed her fingers against the glass. It was cold. What about the injunction? Holding, Patricia said. The judge assigned to the case is known for taking her time, which works in our favor. Nothing gets signed while she's reviewing. How long do we have? Realistically, 10 days, maybe 12. 10 days. 10 days before the window Patricia had mentioned, the window Dante had mentioned, closed or opened into something else depending on what happened inside it. I have a meeting this morning, Evelyn said, with Moretti. Yes. A brief silence that communicated Patricia's opinion on this without requiring her to voice it. What time? 9. Call me afterward. Dante's office was not what she expected, though she later admitted she wasn't sure what she had expected. Something more visibly imposing, maybe. More deliberate. What she found instead was a converted warehouse space in a district that had been industrial 20 years ago and was now split between artists who couldn't afford to move and businesses that had decided the lack of signage suited them. The building had a freight elevator that still worked and exposed brick that someone had clearly made a decision to leave exposed rather than cover. And the office itself was large and relatively sparse. Books, a long work table covered in documents, a single painting on the far wall that Evelyn recognized as a Flemish still life, 17th century, almost certainly original, the kind of painting that belonged in a museum and was here because the man who owned it had decided it belonged here instead. Dante was on the phone when she arrived. His assistant, a compact, expressionless man of about 40, who introduced himself as Wren without offering a last name, showed her to a chair and brought water and then stood near the door in the way of someone whose job included being near doors. Dante finished the call, put down the phone, looked at her. Your sister filed the complaint against your certification, he said. She stared at him. How do you know that? I had my people look into it last night. Your people, she said. Yes. She sat with the implications of that for a moment. The specific implications of a man who had people who could extract information from an accreditation board's confidential records overnight. Is that legal? She said. The information exists, he said. The method of retrieval is a separate question. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. He sat across the table from her. Celeste Vale filed the complaint 11 months into her involvement with Adrian Whitmore. The timing suggests she expected the engagement to end badly, for you, and wanted a tool ready. When the acquisition came under threat, she gave them the tool. My lawyer confirmed it independently, Evelyn said, through the Institute's own records. Good. That means you have a clean version of the information. He paused. I have something else. She waited. He turned a document on the table to face her. She leaned forward and read it. It was a financial summary. Compact, dense, the kind of document that assumed the reader could keep up. She could keep up. She read it twice. The Whitmore family's debt position, she said. As of last quarter, he said. The vineyard acquisition isn't a business decision for them. It's the only thing standing between the family estate and a forced sale. If the acquisition falls through, if your injunction holds and the investors pull back, the Whitmores don't recover. Not quickly. Possibly not at all. She looked up. You've been building this case for longer than one night. I've been watching the Whitmore estate's financial situation for 2 years, he said. It became relevant to me when the vineyard came onto the market. I intended to make an offer through standard channels. Then the Whitmore family moved faster than I anticipated. And by the time I had my bid ready, you had already brought the investors in and the deal was structured around their participation. He paused. I went to the gala to see what I was dealing with. The room was very quiet. You went to the gala to assess me, she said. I went to the gala to assess the acquisition, he said. I hadn't expected to meet you. But you knew my name. I knew your work, he said. Those are different things, and you know that better than most people. She looked at the financial summary again, at the numbers, which were real, and did not care about anyone's feelings. "If I partner with you on a separate acquisition offer," she said slowly, "the Whitmores find out immediately. They'll know I'm the one who torpedoed the deal and moved to a competing bid." "Yes." "That makes me the enemy." "You're already the enemy," he said. "They attacked your certification. That ship has sailed." She pressed her lips together. He wasn't wrong. "And what about the federal investigation? Hargrove called me within hours of my lawyer meeting. They're watching." "They're always watching," he said. "That's not new." He looked at her steadily. "The investigation into my activities focuses on acquisitions made between 4 and 8 years ago. Import transactions, some private security contracts, a series of real estate purchases that were structured in ways that interested the IRS and eventually the FBI. My current legal team has been working that case for 3 years. What I'm proposing with you is entirely legitimate, a clean acquisition, documented thoroughly, above board in every particular." "Because you need it to be," she said. "Because I want it to be," he said. "There's a difference."
Mas.
She stood up, walked to the Flemish still life on the far wall, stood in front of it. It was a painting of food, grapes, oysters, bread, a pewter cup, the kind of painting that was technically about abundance but was actually about time, about the moment between when something was alive and when it wasn't. The Dutch and Flemish painters had understood that better than almost anyone. They had spent an entire century painting the exact second before things changed. "I need the Bertrands," she said. "They're the piece the Nakamura Group trusts. If I don't have the Bertrands, the investor consortium fractures." "What do they need?" Dante said. "A meeting," she said. "In person. Today, if possible. They need to look someone in the eye and decide whether they trust the direction this is going." She turned from the painting. "Can you be in a room with the Bertrand family without alarming them?" He considered this with the same lack of defensiveness he brought to everything. "Possibly," he said. "It depends on what they've heard." "They've heard things," she said. "Everyone's heard things." "Then we find out which things and we address them," he said. He looked at Wren by the door. "Get Bertrand's assistant on the phone. Today, if they're in the city." "Use my name," Wren left without a word. "Using your name might make it worse," Evelyn said. "Or it will make them curious," Dante said. "Curious is workable. Frightened is not." The Bertrands agreed to a 3 o'clock meeting, which Evelyn spent the intervening hours preparing for with the focus of someone who understood that the next 90 minutes were going to determine the shape of the next several years. She reviewed the vineyard soil reports. She reviewed the acquisition timeline. She made notes on 3 index cards. Not a presentation, not a deck, just 3 cards with the core points she wasn't going to leave the room without making. And she put them in her jacket pocket and didn't look at them again. Laurent Bertrand was 64 years old and had the build of a man who had spent 40 years in vineyards rather than offices, broad through the shoulders, with hands that were not soft. His wife Mireille was the sharper presence, smaller, faster-eyed, the one who had asked the questions during their original investor meeting that Evelyn had needed 3 follow-up emails to fully address. Laurent trusted his instincts. Mireille trusted evidence. You needed to satisfy both in the same room simultaneously, which was a specific skill that Evelyn had spent years developing. They met in a private room at a club near the financial district that the Bertrands used when they were in the city. Dark wood, good lighting. The kind of room where decisions that affected a lot of money were made regularly enough that the furniture had absorbed the atmosphere of it. Laurent shook Dante's hand with the wariness of a man who had been briefed. Mireille looked at Evelyn first, which was telling. "We've heard some things," Laurent said, sitting. His accent came and went depending on how formal the conversation was. Right now it was present, which meant he was paying close attention. "About the counterfiling. The counterfiling is built on a false allegation that was submitted by my sister and dismissed by the Vanterre Institute 14 months ago," Evelyn said. She did not sit down yet. "I have documentation from the Institute confirming no investigation exists. My lawyer is filing a response today. If you want to see the documentation before this conversation continues, I have it with me." Laurent looked at Mireille. Mireille said, "Yes." Evelyn put the folder on the table. Mireille opened it, read it. The room was quiet while she read it, which was the kind of quiet that had texture, everyone in it aware of their own breathing, of the slight sound of paper turning. "Celeste Vale," Mireille said. "This is your sister." "Yes." "She filed this complaint while you were engaged to Adrian Whitmore." "Yes." Mireille closed the folder, looked at her husband, then at Evelyn, then at Dante. "Why are you here?" she said to Dante directly. "Not diplomatically. Why are you in this meeting?" "Because I intend to make a competing acquisition offer on the vineyard," Dante said. "And I want Ms. Vale as managing director and equal partner in the venture. I wanted you to hear that from me rather than from a press release." Laurent made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "A competing offer." "The Whitmore acquisition is frozen by court injunction," Dante said. "The window exists. I'm using it." "And the federal investigation into your business activities," Mireille said. "You expect us to—" "I expect you to make a decision based on what you know," Dante said. "Not what you've heard. What you know. You've worked with Evelyn Vale. You've seen what she does with a vineyard's potential. The acquisition structure I'm proposing gives her full operational authority and a legal ownership stake. Everything above board, every document available for review by your lawyers before a single signature goes on anything." He paused. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust her." The room held that for a moment. Laurent looked at Evelyn. "This is what you want?" he said. Not suspiciously, just asking. The way a person who has respected someone's work for several years asks when the situation suddenly looks complicated. "This is what I've decided," she said. Which was true, and was not quite the same thing, and she thought Laurent was perceptive enough to understand the distinction. He nodded slowly. "We'll need to review the acquisition proposal in full," Mireille said. "Our lawyers will need a week." "You have 10 days before the injunction timeline forces a decision," Evelyn said. "A week is fine." They shook hands. The Bertrands left first. When it was just Evelyn and Dante in the room, she sat down for the first time since she'd arrived and felt the specific weight of the last 18 hours settle into her body all at once. The sleeplessness, the cold coffee, the 4 inches of paper, the phone call at 2 in the morning, all of it landing in her muscles simultaneously like they'd been waiting for permission. "You told them to trust me," she said, "not yourself." "It was accurate," he said. "It was also strategic." "Both things can be true." She rubbed her eyes with the heels of her hands. "I need to eat something," she said. "I haven't eaten since last night." He didn't make it a moment. He just called Ren and told him to arrange something, and 20 minutes later there was food on the table in front of her. Not elaborate, just actual food, the kind of meal that understood its function was sustenance rather than presentation. And she ate it and felt her hands stop shaking, which was when she realized they had been shaking. "Dante," she said. "Yes, if this works, if the Bertrands sign on, if the competing offer goes through, if the acquisition happens, what is your actual plan for the vineyard?" He looked at her. "That's your department," he said. "Completely. No vision, no concept, no business model you've already designed that I'm going to be expected to execute?" "I have opinions about investment timelines and return projections," he said. "I don't have opinions about viticulture." "That's the point. I'm funding something I can't build myself and partnering with the person who can build it. The creative authority is yours." He paused. "I don't collaborate well with people I have to manage. You don't work well for people who underestimate you. We seem compatible on that basis." She looked at him for a moment. "That's the least romantic way anyone has ever described a partnership. Would you prefer romantic?" "I'd prefer accurate," she said, which that was. Her phone rang. Patricia Vane. She picked up immediately. "The counter-motion hearing has been moved up," Patricia said. Her voice was tight in a way Evelyn hadn't heard from her before. Compressed, controlled, but tight underneath. "Adrian's lawyers petitioned the court this morning. The judge agreed to an expedited review. We're in front of her in 48 hours. Evelyn set down her fork. 48 hours. "They're trying to collapse the window," Patricia said. "If they can get the injunction dissolved quickly, the acquisition moves forward before your competing offer has time to be structured. Evelyn, we are not ready for a hearing in 48 hours. What do we need?" "We need 3 things. The Institute's written statement on official letterhead confirming the complaint was reviewed and dismissed. The 11 instances of written documentation establishing partnership intent. And a witness, someone who can speak to the verbal agreements made outside the written record. Patricia paused. Do you have anyone who was present for those conversations? Evelyn thought. She thought about every conversation she'd had with Adrian about the vineyard, about where those conversations had happened, about who had been nearby. There was a dinner, she said slowly, last spring, at a restaurant in the warehouse district. Adrian and I and two of the Whitmore family's accountants, Marcus Teal and a woman named Diane So. Adrian talked about the acquisition structure explicitly. He said, she pressed her hand flat on the table. He said, Evelyn is my partner in this in every sense, in front of both of them. Can you reach them? Teal I've met 3 times. So, I have a card for somewhere. She was already standing. I'll find them. Do it tonight, Patricia said. I need to know by morning whether we have a witness. She hung up. Dante was watching her. He hadn't pretended not to listen. 48 hours, she said. I heard. I need to find 2 people who work for the Whitmore family's financial team and convince them to testify voluntarily against the family's interests. She said it aloud to hear how it sounded. It sounded difficult. They'll know the moment I reach out that I'm asking them to choose a side. Yes, he said. They may not choose mine. Then we go to the hearing with what we have, he said. Patricia Vane is good. What you have may be enough. It may not. That's the nature of a hearing, he said, and his voice was even, not falsely calm but genuinely level, the voice of someone who had stood in rooms where things could go either way and had learned to occupy that uncertainty without letting it undo him. You do what can be done before 48 hours. Then you walk into that courtroom and you make the case. She looked at him. You've done this before, she said. Not a vineyard hearing, but sat in a room and waited for someone else to decide your future. A pause. Something moved across his face. More than once, he said. What do you do? She said. While you're waiting? He considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to everything. I remind myself of what I know, he said. Not what I'm afraid of. What I actually know. He paused. You know your work. You know what you built. You know your name belongs on that acquisition, and you have documentation that says so. That's what you know. He paused again. The rest is other people's behavior. You can't control it. You can only be ready for it. She nodded. She picked up her coat. I'll let you know about the witnesses, she said. She was halfway out the door when he said, Evelyn. She turned. Whatever they decide in that hearing, he said, the offer stands. She looked at him across the sparse office, the long work table, the Flemish painting of abundance caught at the moment before it became absence. I know, she said, and she left. Marcus Teal was not difficult to find. He was difficult to convince. She reached him by phone at 6:15 while she was in a cab crossing the city, and he listened to her explain what she needed with the silence of a man doing rapid calculations about his own career and the family that signed his checks. When she finished, he said, Ms. Vale, I have enormous respect for you professionally, but what you're describing would put me in direct conflict with my employer. I know, she said. I have a family. I know that too. I'm sorry, he said. I can't. She hung up, closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them. Diane So took longer to find. She had left the Whitmore accounts team 6 months ago, a detail Evelyn hadn't known, and was now working independently. An industry contact gave Evelyn a new number just before 8 o'clock, and Evelyn called it standing on the sidewalk outside her apartment building in the cold, her breath making small clouds in the air. Diane So picked up on the second ring. I remember that dinner, she said before Evelyn had finished explaining. I remember exactly what he said. Evelyn went very still. I left the Whitmore accounts 6 months ago because of how they operate, Diane said. Her voice was quiet and precise and entirely without hesitation. I've been waiting for something like this to matter. A pause. What do you need from me? A signed statement by 9 tomorrow morning, Evelyn said, and to be available by phone if the lawyer needs to speak with you before the hearing. Send me the details, Diane said. Evelyn called Patricia at 8:22. "I have a witness," she said. Patricia exhaled audibly. "Good. That changes the picture." She paused. "Get some sleep, Evelyn. I mean it. I need you sharp at that hearing." She went upstairs. She showered. She set an alarm for 5:30. She got into bed and lay in the dark and thought about Adrian saying our vineyard in a voicemail she'd saved, and Celeste filing a complaint from a device registered to her own name, and a courtroom 48 hours away where all of it was going to be laid on a table for a judge to weigh. She thought about Dante saying, "You know what you know." She thought about the Flemish painting, the grapes, the pewter cup, the exact moment between one thing and the next. She slept. When she walked into the courtroom 2 days later, she walked in knowing she was ready and not knowing if ready would be enough, which was the only honest position available to her, and she had long since learned that honesty about a position was better than comfort about one that wasn't true. Patricia was beside her. The documentation was in order. Diane So had sent her statement at 8:52 the previous morning, signed and notarized, and its 4 paragraphs were precise and damaging and entirely true. Adrian was already seated at the opposing table when she came in. He looked up when she entered the room. She met his eyes and held them for exactly as long as it took to confirm she was not going to look away first, and then she sat down and opened her folder and did not look at him again. His lawyers were good. She had expected that. The lead attorney, a man named Strickland who wore the particular confidence of someone who billed at a rate that required it, opened with the argument that the acquisition had always been structured with clear delineation between investment partnership and curatorial service, that Evelyn Vale's role as consultant was reflected in every legal document, and that her current claims reflected a personal grievance following the breakdown of a romantic relationship rather than a legitimate legal dispute, a personal grievance following the breakdown of a romantic relationship. Evelyn wrote the phrase in the margin of her notepad, slowly, carefully. Patricia's response was methodical. The 11 written instances. The voicemail transcript submitted as exhibit. Diane So's signed statement. The Institute's letter confirming the complaint against Evelyn's certification had been dismissed 14 months prior. Each piece placed on the table like a card in a game where the outcome depended on which player had been paying more attention for longer. Strickland objected to the voicemail transcript on authentication grounds. The judge, a woman named Carver, who had the expression of someone who had been listening to attorneys argue over things for long enough to have opinions about which arguments were substantive and which were tactical delays, overruled him. He tried to characterize Diane So's statement as the testimony of a disgruntled former employee. Judge Carver read the statement carefully and asked Patricia 3 questions about the circumstances of So's departure from the Whitmore accounts team, and Patricia answered them, and the judge made a note. Then Strickland put Adrian on the stand. He was good on the stand. She had expected that too. He was composed, articulate, and he wore the expression of a man who had been genuinely wronged, not performing it, but actually feeling it, which was what made him convincing, and also what made her absolutely certain that he had told himself a version of this story where he was not the villain. He genuinely believed, or had convinced himself to believe, that the documents accurately reflected the agreement, that consultant was the correct term, that Evelyn's role had been valued and appropriately defined. He looked at her once during his testimony. She held his gaze. He looked away first. Strickland finished. Patricia stood. She had 3 questions for Adrian. Just 3. The first established that he had been present at the dinner in question. The second established that Marcus Teal and Diane So had both been present. The third was this. Mr. Whitmore. I'm reading from Diane So's signed statement. She states that at dinner on the 14th of April, you said, and I quote, Evelyn is my partner in this in every sense. Do you deny making that statement? Silence. Mr. Whitmore. His voice caught, reorganized. That was a casual remark. In a social context, it wasn't a legal, do you deny making the statement? I don't recall the specific. Ms. So recalls it specifically, Patricia said, under penalty of perjury in a notarized statement. Do you deny it? The courtroom was the specific quiet of people holding their breath. Adrian looked at his lawyer. Strickland's expression said nothing helpful. Adrian looked back at Patricia. He was 41 years old, and he had the look of a man who had just realized which version of this story the room was going to believe, and it was not his version, and the realization was doing visible things to his composure. "No," he said, "I don't deny it." The breath the courtroom had been holding let itself out. Judge Carver made a note. She did not rule immediately. She said she would review the materials and issue her decision within 72 hours, and the courtroom stood as she left, and then everyone stopped standing and the room became the particular aftermath of something that had been building for a long time and had finally arrived at the moment where the waiting could begin in earnest. Patricia touched Evelyn's arm. "That went as well as it could go," she said quietly. Evelyn nodded. She was gathering her folder when she heard Strickland say something to Adrian in a voice low enough to be private and loud enough to carry. "She's going to get the injunction extended. We need to move on the alternative structure before—" She didn't hear the rest. She didn't need to. She knew what alternative structure meant in the context of a frozen acquisition and a financial situation that couldn't sustain delay. The Whitmore family was going to do something. What they were going to do and how fast they were going to do it was the question that was going to determine everything that happened next. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the courtroom into the corridor and then into the elevator and then into the building lobby and then out onto the street, and she stood on the sidewalk with her folder under her arm and the late afternoon light hitting the buildings at the angle it hit them in November, flat and gray and completely without opinion about what had just happened inside. She called Dante. He picked up on the first ring. "The hearing went well," she said. "Patricia thinks Carver rules in our favor. 72 hours. "Good," he said. "Strickland told Adrian they need to move on an alternative structure before the ruling comes down," she said. "I don't know what that means yet." A pause. "It means they're going to try to restructure the acquisition to remove your claim," Dante said. "Either by reclassifying the deal in a way that cuts the investors out entirely and moves it to a private family transaction, or—" He stopped. "Or what? Or they go directly to the vineyard's original owners and make a side arrangement that bypasses the existing deal entirely." She felt the bottom of her stomach shift. "Can they do that?" "The injunction blocks the current deal," Dante said. "It doesn't block a different one. If they can get the owners to void the existing sale agreement and enter a new one, they bypass everything," she said. "The injunction, the competing offer, all of it. Yes." She pressed her free hand flat against the cold concrete of the building behind her. "How fast can you move?" "On what?" "On the competing offer. How fast can you put it in front of the original owners?" A silence. Not long. The specific silence of a man doing the actual calculation rather than the approximate one. "If I have the proposal drafted tonight and Wren takes it to their attorneys tomorrow morning before business hours?" He paused. "Tomorrow afternoon. Maybe evening." "We need tomorrow morning," she said. "Then I need to start tonight." "So do I," she said. She pushed off the wall. "Evelyn." "Yeah." "You were right in that courtroom," he said. "I had someone there." She stopped walking. "You had someone watching the hearing." "Yes." She thought about Patricia's advice, about the FBI, about a man who had people who could retrieve information overnight and who sent watchers to courtrooms without mentioning it. She thought about all of it, and she made the same calculation she had been making since the night she'd gotten into his car on a sidewalk outside the Hargrove Hotel. The calculation about what she knew versus what she was afraid of, and whether the thing she was afraid of was the same as the thing she should be afraid of. "Adrian looked away first," she said. "I know," Dante said. "My person mentioned it." And somewhere in the middle of the gray November afternoon, standing on the sidewalk outside a courthouse with 72 hours before a ruling that could reshape the next decade of her life, Evelyn Vale almost smiled. "I'll be at your office in an hour," she said. "Have the proposal framework ready." She hung up and walked toward the street to find a cab, and the city moved around her with its usual indifference, and she moved through it with something she hadn't carried in long enough that it took her a moment to identify. She was ready. They worked until 2 in the morning. Not dramatically, not with any of the cinematic energy that the word war implied when Evelyn had used it 3 days ago in the back of a restaurant. They work the way people work when the stakes are high enough that performance becomes a waste of energy, quietly, methodically, with the focused ugliness of two people who understood that what they were building had to be stronger than what it was trying to replace. Ren brought coffee at 10. At midnight, he brought it again without being asked. At 1:15, he laid a revised acquisition proposal on the work table and stepped back, and Evelyn read it line by line while Dante sat across from her reading the same document on his screen. And whenever she found something that needed adjustment, she said, "So," and he either agreed or he didn't, and they worked through it until both of them were satisfied, which was a slower process than either of them had expected, because they had, it turned out, equally high standards and equally low tolerance for language that could be interpreted two ways. "This clause," she said, pointing at a paragraph on page 7, "it gives you override authority on operational decisions in the event of a financial dispute." "Standard language," he said. "It's in most partnership agreements." "It shouldn't be in this one," she said. "If we have a financial dispute, we resolve it between us or we bring in a mediator. You don't get unilateral override. Neither do I." He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at Ren. "Take it out," he said. Ren made the change. "If we're going to do this," Evelyn said, "it has to actually mean what it says. Equal. Not equal until there's a disagreement." "Agreed," Dante said, without ceremony, without making it a moment. Just agreed, and the document moved forward. That was, she thought, how you knew whether someone meant what they said. Not in the saying of it, in the first time it cost them something. They finished at 2:07. Ren printed the proposal and put it in a courier envelope addressed to the vineyard's legal representatives, with instructions to deliver it at 7 in the morning when the firm's office opened. Not 1 minute later. 7. Evelyn stood up and stretched and felt the hours in her back and her neck and the specific hollow behind her eyes that came from too much reading and too little sleep. Dante walked her down to the freight elevator. They stood in the industrial corridor waiting for it to arrive, and the building was entirely quiet around them, the kind of quiet that belongs exclusively to very late at night in working buildings when the work is done. "The owners will have it by 7:15, Dante said. "Their attorneys will need a few hours to review. We should hear something by noon. If they're going to counteroffer, it'll be tomorrow afternoon," she said, "before the Whitmore team gets to them." "Yes." The elevator arrived, old, slow, the grill taking its time. "Get some sleep," he said. You too." She got in the elevator. He stood in the corridor watching the grill close, and she watched him through it. The composed face, the scar above the eye, the quality of stillness that she had initially found unreadable and now understood as the particular stillness of a person who had survived enough difficult things that they had stopped requiring the world to be otherwise. The grill closed. The elevator descended. She slept 4 hours. It was, under the circumstances, a triumph. Patricia called at 8:47. "Judge Carver issued her preliminary ruling," she said. Evelyn sat up. "Already?" "She must have worked through the night. It's not the final order. That takes 72 hours to formalize. But she issued a preliminary finding." Patricia's voice carried something Evelyn hadn't heard in it yet. Not quite relief. The precursor to relief, the breath before it. "She found in your favor on the partnership claim. The documentation was sufficient. The injunction stands, and she's indicated the final order will formalize your legal standing as co-claimant on the acquisition." Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed with the phone against her ear and said nothing for a moment. "Evelyn?" "I heard you," she said. I'm here." "Strickland will file an appeal," Patricia said. "Almost certainly. This isn't over. But the preliminary finding changes the landscape significantly. It means any competing offer you make now has a legal basis. You're not just a claimant, you're a recognized partner whose rights were violated by the existing acquisition structure." She paused. "Where are you with the Moretti proposal?" "It went to the vineyard's attorneys at 7 this morning." A silence. "How solid is it?" "Solid," Evelyn said. "Better than the Whitmore deal?" She thought about the document she and Dante had spent 5 hours revising. The terms, the timeline, the operational structure, the legal clarity that made the Whitmore deal's consultant versus partner ambiguity look like what it was, a deliberate manipulation rather than an oversight. "Yes," she said. Better in every particular that matters to an owner who wants their vineyard to become something. Then we have a window, Patricia said. Use it today. She was out of the apartment by 9:30. The call she didn't expect came at 10:44. Not from Patricia. Not from Dante. From a number she recognized after a beat as belonging to the Whitmore family's private line. Not Adrian's personal phone, but the estate number. The one that rang in the house itself. The house she had visited 14 times over the course of the acquisition and had once briefly imagined might become something she was connected to permanently. She picked up. Evelyn. The voice on the other end was older, not Adrian. His mother, Eleanor Whitmore, 67 years old, with the voice of a woman who had grown up being listened to and had maintained that expectation across 6 decades without significant interruption. I'd like to speak with you, in person, today, if possible. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk and thought about Patricia's instruction not to speak with the Whitmore family without informing her first. I'll need to let my attorney know about this conversation, she said. I'm not calling as an adversary, Eleanor said. I'm calling as someone who would like to discuss this situation without lawyers in the room. I think we may understand each other better than either of us realizes. A pause. I know what my son did, with your sister, and with the documents. Her voice didn't waver when she said it, which was either admirable or alarming, and Evelyn wasn't yet sure which. I'd like to talk. She texted Patricia. Eleanor Whitmore wants to meet, in person, no lawyers. Thoughts? Patricia's response came in 40 seconds. Don't go alone. Take someone. She called Dante. He answered before the second ring. Eleanor Whitmore wants to meet, she said. I know, he said. She called my office 10 minutes ago. Evelyn stopped walking. She called you. She asked whether you'd be coming alone, he said. I told her I didn't know. She said she hoped not. The morning moved around her on all sides. Will you come? She said. If you want me there. I want you there. They met Eleanor Whitmore at the family's townhouse on the Upper East Side. Not the estate, not a lawyer's office, but the city residence, which said something about how she wanted this conversation to feel. The townhouse was old and well-maintained in the way of things that are valuable enough to be taken care of without being transformed. A housekeeper opened the door. Eleanor was waiting in a sitting room that smelled of old wood and cut flowers, standing near the window rather than sitting, which was the posture of a woman who had decided to receive them on her own terms. She looked at Dante first, not with fear, with the careful assessment of a person who had spent a lifetime evaluating the people her family dealt with and had gotten very good at the evaluation. Then she looked at Evelyn. Sit down, she said. Please. They sat. Eleanor remained standing for a moment, then sat across from them with the deliberate movement of someone managing a body that was not always cooperative, and folded her hands in her lap. I'll be direct, she said. The family's financial position is not what it was. I imagine you know that. Yes, Evelyn said. The vineyard acquisition was Adrian's attempt to stabilize it. He was not wrong that it could work. He was wrong about... She paused, pressed her lips together briefly. He was wrong about how he went about it, about the documents, about Evelyn's role. She looked at Evelyn directly. He was wrong about your sister. I want to say that clearly, and I want to say it without his lawyers in the room, because I'm aware that with lawyers present, everything becomes a position rather than a truth. The room was quiet. Evelyn said nothing. She had learned over the past week that silence was frequently more powerful than the response you were tempted to make. What do you want from this meeting? Dante said. His voice was even, not hostile, not warm, just present. Eleanor looked at him. I want to know whether there is a version of this situation that doesn't end with my family's estate being publicly dismantled while my son's personal failures become a news story. She paused. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking whether there is a structure that works. What kind of structure? Evelyn said. The Whitmore name still means something in this industry, Eleanor said. Not what it once did, but something. If the acquisition moves forward under different terms, under your terms, she looked at Evelyn. Is there a way to keep the name involved? Evelyn looked at Dante. He was watching her, not Eleanor, because he understood that this was her call, had always been her call, and was demonstrating that understanding by not making it his. She thought about the proposal sitting on a vineyard attorney's desk across the city. She thought about the name she had already chosen for what that vineyard could become, working through the night over coffee and revised clauses, a name she hadn't told anyone yet. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore standing at her window with the posture of a woman who had arrived at a conversation she had not wanted to need. The Whitmore family contributed the initial property connection, Evelyn said. That has value. If the acquisition moves forward under the new structure, I would consider a minority acknowledgement. Not ownership, not operational involvement, but a formal recognition of the original introduction. An historical note in the vineyard's documentation. Something that doesn't disappear. Eleanor looked at her for a moment. That's less than Adrian would have gotten. Yes, Evelyn said. It's more than he deserves. The silence that followed that statement was not comfortable. It was, however, honest, and Eleanor Whitmore appeared to be a woman who had lived long enough to value honesty over comfort when the two were in conflict. What about the family's debt position? Eleanor said. If the deal falls through entirely, that's not my problem to solve, Evelyn said. Not unkindly, not cruelly, just accurately. I'm sorry about the estate. I understand what it means, but the situation your family is in exists because of decisions your son made, and I am not the person who should be managing the consequences of those decisions. Eleanor absorbed this. Her hands in her lap were still, the stillness of discipline, of a woman who had learned not to let her hands betray what her face was controlled enough to conceal. All right, she said. Evelyn? Another voice. From the doorway. Adrian. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of the sitting room in a way that suggested he'd been there for some of the conversation and had made a decision to enter it. He looked tired, not the cultivated exhaustion of someone making a point, but the actual tiredness of a person who had not slept well in days. He looked like someone who had been living with something and was finding it heavier than expected. Mother, he said, you shouldn't have done this without telling me. Sit down, Adrian, Eleanor said. He didn't sit. He stayed in the doorway and looked at Evelyn, and the look had too many things in it to sort cleanly. Guilt, defensiveness, and somewhere underneath both of those, something that looked like the remains of something genuine that had been buried under too many bad decisions to be visible until now. Evelyn, he said, I owe you. Don't, she said. I need to say, Adrian. Her voice was not raised. It was not theatrical. It was simply the voice of someone who was done waiting for other people to decide what they deserved. I'm not here for an apology. I don't need one to move forward. What I need from you is to drop the counterclaim and instruct Strickland not to file the appeal. His jaw tightened. The appeal prolongs something that is already decided, she said. Judge Carver found in my favor. The documentation exists. Diane So's statement exists. Your own voice on a voicemail saying, our vineyard 3 times exists. She looked at him steadily. You can spend the next 6 months fighting this and lose, or you can let it end today and preserve whatever professional standing you have left. Those are the options. He looked at Dante. Something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, but the particular discomfort of a man confronting the person his former partner had chosen to stand next to and finding that the choice made sense in a way he didn't want to acknowledge. Who are you in this? Adrian said to Dante. The question was blunter than it sounded, not aggressive, genuinely asking. A business partner, Dante said. Nothing that concerns you. Everything about you concerns me, Adrian said. That's your prerogative, Dante said. It doesn't change what Evelyn asked you. Adrian looked at his mother. Eleanor looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had made her own assessment of the situation and was waiting for her son to reach the same conclusion she had. He looked at the floor. He was quiet for longer than the room was comfortable with. I'll call Strickland, he said. No appeal. Evelyn nodded. The counterclaim? I'll withdraw it. She stood. Thank you. He looked up. That's all? What else would there be? He had no answer. She hadn't expected one. She walked to the door. Dante stood and followed, and they were almost to the hallway when Adrian said her name one more time. She turned. He was still standing in the middle of the sitting room, his mother behind him, and he looked like a man who understood, perhaps for the first time, the full weight of what he'd had and what he'd spent it on. Was it ever real? He said. For you. Were we ever? Yes. she said. Without cruelty, without softness, just the truth. It was real. That's what made the rest of it what it was. She left. Outside on the street, the November air was cold and the light was thin, and Dante fell into step beside her without comment, and they walked half a block before either of them said anything. He'll honor it, Dante said. The withdrawal. I know, she said. He wants it to be over as much as I do. And Celeste? She hadn't spoken to her sister since the phone call the morning after the gala. She had thought about it in the spaces between everything else, late at night, in cabs, in the corridor outside the courtroom, and had arrived each time at the same understanding that some things had to be set down rather than resolved, that closure was sometimes the decision to stop needing it rather than the achievement of it. I don't know yet, she said. Not today. He accepted that. The Vineyard's attorneys called at 3:18 in the afternoon. Evelyn was at Patricia's office when it happened, sitting across the desk from her lawyer reviewing the documentation of Adrian's withdrawn counterclaim, and she picked up and listened, and when she put the phone down, Patricia was watching her with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read outcomes from faces. They accepted the offer, Evelyn said. Patricia closed the folder on her desk, slowly. Subject 2? Final contract review, standard due diligence. They want a meeting next week. She paused. They said the proposal was the most thorough they'd seen in 30 years of selling wine properties. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, You should feel good about this. I do, Evelyn said. I also feel like I've been awake for a week. You have, approximately. Patricia leaned back in her chair. What happens with the federal investigation? Hargrove's people are still going to want to speak with you. I'll meet with them, Evelyn said. With you present. I have nothing to hide. Everything I've done in connection with Dante Moretti has been documented and legitimate. And Moretti himself? Evelyn thought about the work table covered in documents. The clause he'd removed without argument, because she'd been right. The Flemish painting of abundance at the moment before it changed. He's a complicated person doing something legitimate with me, she said. I can't control what the investigation does with the rest of his history. I can only be responsible for my part of it. That's a careful answer, Patricia said. It's the accurate one, Evelyn said. She left the office at 4. She stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand and the afternoon darkening around her. November doing what November did, pulling the light down earlier than felt fair. And she called Dante. They accepted, she said. A pause, not surprise. The pause of someone receiving confirmation of something they had been cautiously expecting. Good, he said. Meeting next week. I'll have Wren coordinate the travel. There's one thing, she said. About the name. The Vineyard. Yes. She had been carrying this since the night they'd worked on the proposal, since she'd written it in the margin of a draft document at 1 a.m, and then crossed it out, and then written it again and left it. I want to call it Moretti Vale. A silence. Not Moretti, she said. Not Vale, both, together. She pressed her free hand into her coat pocket. It should reflect what it actually is, not one person's project, not one person's money. Both people's investment in a thing that didn't exist before both of them. The silence continued, longer than she'd expected. Dante. I'm here, he said. His voice was different, not dramatically. By the same degree that things had shifted in his expression the night of the gala, the undersurface thing, the current under ice. Moretti Vale, he said, like he was registering it somewhere, the same way he'd said her name. Yes, she said. All right, he said, quietly. All right, she said. She put her phone in her pocket and stood in the thin November light and breathed, and the city moved around her with its usual complete commitment to its own business, and she moved through it toward the subway with her hands in her pockets, and the specific feeling of a person who has been through something that changed the shape of things and is now walking through the changed landscape for the first time at ordinary speed. The meeting with Agent Hargrove happened 10 days later, in a conference room in a federal building that had the institutional carpet and fluorescent lighting of a place that took itself seriously. Patricia sat on one side of Evelyn. Hargrove sat across from them with a colleague whose name Evelyn didn't catch, and a folder that was thicker than she'd expected. Hargrove was in his mid-40s, trim, with the careful eyes of someone who had been paying attention to one thing for a very long time. He asked his questions methodically, without aggression, the way Patricia had predicted, thorough rather than hostile, which was in some ways more unnerving than hostile would have been. He asked about the gala. She answered. He asked about the text message. She showed it to him on her phone. Patricia had advised her to be transparent with anything she'd already described in the preliminary conversation. He asked about the dinner. She answered. He asked about the proposal. The acquisition proposal submitted to the vineyard's attorneys, he said. You co-authored it. Yes. With Moretti. Yes. It's a legitimate business document for a legitimate business transaction. I have copies of every draft. I know, Hargrove said. We've reviewed them. He paused. Ms. Vale, I want to be direct with you. He folded his hands on the table, and the gesture was so similar to Eleanor Whitmore's that Evelyn noted it without meaning to. Dante Moretti has been the subject of this investigation for 3 years. The activities under investigation predate his involvement with you by several years. Nothing we've seen in connection with the vineyard acquisition falls within the scope of what we're investigating. She waited. The man is complicated, Hargrove said. He has done things in his past that are going to have consequences, and those consequences are going to arrive regardless of what he's doing now. I want you to understand that clearly and on the record so that you can make informed decisions about your professional association. I appreciate you telling me that directly, Evelyn said. Is there anything else you want to know? Hargrove said. She thought about it. What happens to the investigation? It continues, he said, separate from anything involving you. He paused. You're not a target, Ms. Vale. You're not a witness in the case we're building. You're someone who made a business arrangement with a complicated man and documented it carefully and thoroughly, and frankly, that's about as clean as these situations get. She nodded. Patricia stood. Then I think we're done. They were done. Outside the federal building in the thin December light, she hadn't noticed November turning into December, but it had. It did those things while you were looking elsewhere. Patricia said, he was warning you. I know, Evelyn said, about what's coming for Moretti. I know. She pulled her coat tighter. I'll tell him. She told him that evening. Not in his office, not over a working dinner. She called him and told him on the phone, clearly and without editorializing, what Hargrove had said, which was that the investigation was continuing and the consequences were coming regardless. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. I've known for a year that it was coming. And my lawyers are ready, he said. The charges will be what they are. I can't make them less than they are. What I can do is make sure that everything I'm building now is structured in a way that doesn't fall when I do. When, she said. Probably when, he said. Yes. She sat with that. The vineyard is yours, he said. Entirely and legally regardless of what happens to me. That's in the ownership documents. It was always going to be in the ownership documents. That's why you insisted on the specific language in Section 4, she said. She had noticed the clause but hadn't asked about it at the time, had filed it as thoroughness. Yes, he said. She thought about the name. Moretti Vale. Both names. I'm not changing the name, she said. A silence. Evelyn, it's both of us, she said. Whatever happens, that doesn't change. He didn't argue. She had the sense that he had thought about arguing and had decided against it, which was as close as Dante Moretti got to being moved by something. The federal indictment came down in February, on a Tuesday morning that was gray and cold in the way of February Tuesdays, and it named Dante in connection with a series of financial crimes and illegal acquisitions spanning 4 years. His legal team was ready. The charges were serious and they were real. She made herself look at them clearly, all of them, without minimizing. And the process that followed was going to be long and uncertain and genuinely costly in every sense. She was at the vineyard the day the news broke. She had moved operations out there the previous month, setting up a temporary office in the farmhouse on the property while the renovation plans were being finalized, and she was in the middle of reviewing soil analysis reports when her phone started receiving notifications, and she set down the reports and read the news and sat with it for a while in the quiet of the farmhouse kitchen. Then she called Patricia, who told her what she already knew, which was that her ownership of the vineyard was legally protected and the indictment had nothing to do with the acquisition. Then she called Dante, who picked up on the second ring. "I saw," she said. "I know," he said. "Are you all right?" A pause. "I'm managing," he said, which was not the same thing as all right, and he knew she would understand the distinction. "My team expected this. We're ready." "I know you are." She looked out the farmhouse window at the property, the rows, the winter bare vines, the sky the color of pewter over the hills. "I'm staying in it," she said. "The vineyard, the name, all of it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "That's what makes it mean something." He was quiet for a moment. "When the trial is over," he said carefully, "whether it goes one way or the other, we'll deal with whatever it is when it is," she said. "That's what we do." "You're not afraid of it," he said. Not a question. "I'm afraid of some of it," she said. "I'm going forward anyway." The trial lasted 7 weeks. She drove to the city for parts of it, sat in the gallery on days when Patricia told her it would matter for him to see a face he trusted, and sat in the farmhouse kitchen for the days when there was nothing she could do except work and wait, which was its own particular discipline. His lawyers were good. The documentation of his recent legitimate activities, the vineyard among other things, the clean paper trail that Evelyn had insisted on from the first night they'd worked at his table, established clearly that whatever he had done in the years under investigation, the direction of his life had changed. It didn't erase the charges, it wasn't meant to, but it meant something to the judge who had to weigh all of it. The sentence was 2 years reduced to 16 months for cooperation on aspects of the financial investigation, with the remainder to be served under supervised release. His attorneys had expected worse. The judge's remarks noted specifically evidence of genuine transition in his professional conduct over the preceding year. She was in the gallery when the sentence was read. She watched his face in the moment the number was given, the way it received the information. Not relief exactly, not collapse, but the specific settling of a person who has been holding something at arm's length and is now permitted to set it down. He turned in the dock and found her face in the gallery. He looked at her. She held his gaze. She didn't smile. It wasn't a moment for smiling, but she didn't look away either, and the thing that passed between them in that look was not dramatic. It was just true. The truth of two people who had arrived at something real by the most unlikely route available and had decided to keep arriving. The vineyard was called Moretti Vale. The first harvest happened the following autumn, and it was modest. They hadn't expected anything else. The vines needed time. Everything needed time. But the wine they produced from it was good. Genuinely good. Not commercially perfect, not the kind of thing that wins competitions in its first year, but good in the way that mattered. Good in the way you could taste the decision-making behind it. The care that understood the difference between what a vine could produce under pressure and what it could produce when it was given the conditions it actually needed. Evelyn sent a bottle to Patricia Vane. She sent one to the Bertrands, who responded with a handwritten note from Murray that said, simply, "We knew." She sent one to Diane So, who had taken a position with a competing wine consultancy and was, by all accounts, thriving. She did not send one to Adrian. She did not send one to Celeste. She had called Celeste once, 3 months after the gala, from the farmhouse kitchen on a Sunday morning. The call had lasted 11 minutes. Celeste had been defensive in the first 5 minutes and quiet in the last 6. And at the end of it, Evelyn had said, "I don't hate you. I want you to know that. But I can't have you in my life the way I did before, and I don't think either of us should pretend otherwise." Celeste had said nothing for a moment, and then she'd said, "Okay." And that was where they had left it. Not reconciled, not definitively severed, just honest about what had been lost and what it would take to rebuild it, which was more than either of them had right now, and possibly more than either of them ever would. And accepting that was its own kind of grief that she allowed herself to feel without rushing through it. Dante came back to the vineyard in the spring, 16 months after the sentence, On a morning that was clear and warm in the way that spring mornings occasionally achieve, the kind of morning that doesn't remind you of anything except itself, that exists entirely in its own right. She was in the east block of the property, checking on a section of vines that had shown some disease pressure the previous summer and had spent the winter being treated, and she heard the car on the gravel drive and recognized the sound of it before she turned around. He looked different, slightly. The way people look after they've been through something that marked them. Not diminished, not broken, but changed in the way of things that have been under pressure and have held. He was thinner. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He carried himself with the same stillness he always had, but there was something in it now that was less controlled and more actual, like a man who had been stripped of everything unnecessary and was standing in what remained and finding it sufficient. He stopped at the edge of the vine row. She looked at him. She was holding a pruning tool in one hand and had dirt on her jacket, and she had been up since 5:30, and her hair was doing something she hadn't addressed, and she was aware of all of this and cared about none of it. "The East Block looks better," he said. "The treatment worked," she said. "Mostly. We lost about 10% of the yield projection, but the rest of the vines are healthy." He nodded. He looked at the vines, at the sky, at the property that had been a failing acquisition and was now slowly and genuinely becoming something. "Moretti Vale," he said, like he was reading the name for the first time. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I'm back," he said. "I know," she said. "I can see that." "I don't know exactly what that means yet," he said. "What I'm building from here. I have some ideas, the legitimate kind." "I know you do," she said. "We'll figure it out." He walked toward her down the vine row, slowly, the gravel and earth under his feet, the spring light doing what spring light does. And he stopped when he was close enough that she could see the fullness of the change in his face, the cost and the arrival, both at once. And she looked at him the way she looked at a wine she intended to understand, without rushing, without deciding before the information was complete, with the full attention of someone for whom the thing in front of them was worth taking seriously. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed," she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a moment designed for memory. It was simply the truth, stated between two people who had learned, through a process that had been expensive for both of them in ways they hadn't anticipated, that truth stated plainly was more valuable than anything performed beautifully. She handed him the pruning tool. He took it. She walked ahead of him down the row, and he followed, and they worked through the morning in the way they had built things from the beginning, together, with honesty, with the willingness to say when something needed to change and the discipline to change it, under a sky that moved from pale to blue to the rich, specific blue of mid-morning that exists above working land and nowhere else, in a place that had their names on it and the work of both of them in its soil, growing towards something that had no guarantee of being anything in particular except real, which had always been, for both of them, the thing that mattered most.